I noticed in reading the Book of Mormon, soon after I joined the faculty here, the appearance of Lehi's tent in the narrative. My father dwelt in a tent, Nephi says in a couple of places, and he mentions the tent in other contexts. And I wondered if that was a seam, a literary seam. So I looked at it more carefully to see if Nephi's mention of his father's tent had anything to do with this part of the story and then a different part of the story. And that led me to think of the record of Lehi, which Joseph Smith translated onto 116 pages, which were subsequently lost. And that was called the record of Lehi, and that must have preserved the record that Nephi mined for his own narrative. He says in these three places, as he goes along, that he's taking materials from his father. His father had written it, and Nephi was taking from it. So I thought, well, if the record of Lehi is real, there ought to be a way to look at the records of his two writing sons, Nephi and Jacob. And sure enough, there are long quotes, there are long paraphrases, there are allusions to this record. And that was the first thing that put me into this world, that the book of Lehi is partially recoverable. And that's saying something about a dictated text. If Joseph Smith is dictating this day after day to his scribes, there has to be some way that to explain the fact that here's a long set of quotes here, and there's another set, and here's a long paraphrase, here's a shorter paraphrase, here's a longer paraphrase, and then here's reference back to the record and so on. That was the first thing that, in an intellectual or academic way, got me inside the Book of Mormon in a serious way. That was the first thing that tipped me off that this thing was real. Then, of course, the rest of this comes behind it. Years later, I decided to try to write something about Lehi's trek and be as careful as I could. And sure enough, little details popped up that connect with ancient Near East in striking ways. And, this little idea that Nephi surely knew how to get inside the city, because he grew up there as a teenager, and all the teens in the town knew how to get inside the city, even with the gates locked. But beyond those little tiny things, you think about Sariah and how key she is to this story. You think about Lehi's dream. This is not a dream that's at home in upstate New York. This is a dream that's at home in Arabia. And little teeny things like Nahum, and this bountiful on this little tiny part of southern Arabia, which matches Nephi's botanical description of this place, and so on. So all these things sort of overlay one on top of another and build one on the other. So my academic testimony of the Book of Mormon is pretty strong. People have tried to push me off the Nahum thing. That there was, before I published the article, long article that I wrote on Lehi's trek, somebody made the claim that, well, Joseph Smith must have gotten his name from a publication, a German publication, which had been translated into English a few years before his family moved to New Hampshire. You know, they lived not far from Dartmouth College. And in fact, Hiram went to Dartmouth College briefly. So the idea was that Joseph Smith, as a precocious 7-year-old, goes to Dartmouth College library, browses around, finds something on ancient Arabia, browses through it, finds the name Nehem, spelled Nehem, in that source, and then plops it in by changing the files, plops it into this narrative. So with the help of the institute teacher who had formerly worked at Dartmouth, she went to the accession records of the library and found that this publication had not come into the possession of Dartmouth Library until the 1840s. Just a tad late for Joseph Smith to have seen it. It came from a private library somewhere else, some Dartmouth grad who had passed away. Children didn't know what to do with all this stuff, so they sent his library out to the college. And Dartmouth puts a date on these things when it acquired these things. So there's no way Joseph Smith could have gotten that out of a published record. In my opinion, there is just no way that this farm kid named Joseph Smith, whose family lived just outside Palmyra, could create this record, especially with its myriad ties into the world of the ancient Near East. Just no way he could do that. He might get one thing right, perhaps two, but after that, it's impossible for him to create this thing.